New streets feel like corridors, wide lanes, blank glass, rushing cars. Old streets feel alive. They slow you down, they make you notice. It's not just looks, it's how they make us feel, move, remember. We'll explore their DNA, built before cars, shaped by markets, wells, alleys, buildings that hold history, streets rich with smells, voices, textures, networks that keep life close, what's lost to cars and overplanning, and how to bring the magic back with human scale, mixed uses, and design for people. Why old streets feel magical and new ones don't. Old streets in pre-automobile cities were not planned for cars. They formed over time in response to the way people moved on foot or with animals. Paths often began as simple tracks between homes, fields, and water sources. Over years, these tracks widened and became permanent streets. The shapes of these streets were irregular because they followed the terrain, property lines, or natural barriers rather than a fixed plan. In many towns, a bend in the road might have started to avoid a large tree, a hill, or a stream. Once set, the route stayed even after the original reason for its curve had gone. These early layouts adapted as communities grew. A settlement might start with one main route connecting to another town. Side lanes would branch off toward farms or workshops. As more people arrived, more lanes were added, often linking to existing ones at odd angles. The result was a web of routes that looked uneven but worked well for the people who used them. This irregularity made the streets feel alive and closely connected to the history of the place. Many old cities followed what could be called a village stitched together pattern. Each area within the larger town had what people needed day to day. A small market, a water well, a bakery, a smithy, and a place of worship were all within walking distance. People rarely needed to travel far for basic goods or services. In larger cities, these local clusters connected by narrow lanes created a patchwork of neighborhoods. Each had its own rhythm and character, shaped by the work and life of the people living there. The physical form of these streets often reflected the limits of movement at the time. With no cars, narrow widths were not a problem. In many cases, streets were just wide enough for two carts to pass. In busy market areas, even this was a squeeze. Buildings often grew right up to the street edge. Overhanging upper floors sometimes reduced the width even further, creating shaded spaces where people could talk or trade without standing in full sun. Historic infrastructure shaped the way these streets developed. Aqueducts bringing water into a city often set the course for certain roads. The need to maintain access to the aqueduct path meant the route stayed open even if the water system changed. Wells were central gathering points and often became the heart of small squares. Market squares grew in open spaces where several streets met, creating natural hubs for trade and exchange. Some of these markets still operate in the same spots centuries later. Alleyways played an important role in these older street systems. They allowed quick movement between larger roads and gave service access to workshops, kitchens, and storage rooms. These narrow routes could be winding and dark, but they often provided shelter from wind or rain. In cities with a history of conflict, they also offered escape routes. Local people knew them well, while outsiders could easily get lost. The layering of history is visible in how old streets still guide life today. A modern cafe might sit where a stable once stood. A delivery truck might follow a path first used by donkey carts. Even when buildings have been replaced many times, the line of the street often remains. This continuity links present life to the decisions of people long gone. For example, in parts of Rome, streets still follow the lines of ancient Roman roads. In some cases, a modern road might be only a few meters away from where a Roman legion marched 2,000 years ago. In cities like Fez in Morocco, the Medina's maze-like lanes follow patterns set in the medieval period, when the width of a street matched the swing of a pack mule's load. In smaller European towns, the main square often sits where the market once did, sometimes above the remains of older buildings or roads. In pre-automobile cities, the street served more than one purpose. It was a place to move, to trade, to meet, and to play. Children might play in the street because there was little traffic to fear. Traders could spread goods on the ground or set up stalls without blocking large vehicles. Religious processions could pass through without much disruption. The lack of heavy, fast-moving transport meant streets were more flexible spaces for daily life. These conditions made street life intimate. People knew the baker not just as a shopkeeper, but as a neighbor they passed every day. A person carrying water from the well might stop to speak with 3 or 4 people on the way home. News, help, and goods all moved through the same narrow channels. The closeness of streets and buildings brought voices, smells, and sights together in a way that tied communities closely to their environment. When cities expanded, they often absorbed nearby villages rather than building entirely new districts from scratch. This village-stitched-together effect meant that old roads between villages became main streets within the city. The spaces where 2 villages met might develop into new markets or craft areas. The different patterns of each village, whether straight lanes or winding alleys, remained in place, producing cities with layers of different street shapes side by side. In many historic centers today, the complexity of the street network is a record of this gradual growth. A single street might change names several times as it passes through what were once separate settlements. Some streets narrow or widen without clear reason, reflecting past changes in land use. A route might twist suddenly because it once skirted a pond or crossed a small bridge that no longer exists. Old streets also reveal the social structure of their time. In wealthier areas, streets were sometimes paved or lined with drains to manage wastewater. In poorer areas, they might remain dirt tracks, becoming muddy in rain and dusty in heat. The width of the street could hint at the type of traffic it carried, from wide processional ways to thin passages meant only for foot traffic. In places with long histories, the same street might hold traces from several eras. A cobblestone surface could hide older paving stones beneath it. A building line might be broken by a narrow gap, marking where an alley once connected to another road. The walls of buildings often hold stones or bricks from earlier structures, recycling materials from demolished houses or public works. These inherited forms have proven adaptable. Even with modern traffic and utilities, many old streets still function. They may carry fewer vehicles or require one-way systems, but their basic routes remain valuable. The narrow, irregular paths slow movement, which can make them safer for pedestrians. The close spacing of services keeps them relevant in an age where walking and cycling are encouraged again. By understanding the origins of these streets, we see why they endure. They are not the result of one grand plan, but of many small, practical decisions made by generations of people responding to their needs and surroundings. This process gave them a kind of resilience that still shapes how they are used today. Buildings can act as a record of the forces that shaped a city. Their styles, details, and materials show the movement of people, the reach of trade, and the impact of colonization. When you walk down a street with many styles, you are looking at layers of history made solid in stone, brick, and timber. A street lined with buildings from different periods is not random. It reflects who came, what they brought, and how they adapted their ideas to local conditions. Migration often leaves a visible mark on architecture. A group arriving from another country will build using the forms they know, but they will adapt them to the materials and climate they find. Over time, those forms mix with local traditions. Trade works in a similar way. When goods move between places, so do ideas about how to design and decorate. A merchant importing tiles or ironwork might also bring the style that suits those materials. Colonization often brings the most abrupt changes, as ruling powers impose their own architectural forms on a place, either to assert authority or to provide familiar surroundings for their own citizens. Kuala Lumpur is a good example of this blend. Its older districts hold Chinese shophouses with narrow frontages and long interiors, designed for both living and trading under one roof. These buildings often have tiled roofs and shutters to manage sun and rain. Some are decorated with ceramic reliefs or painted panels telling stories from Chinese folklore. Beside them, you might find a building with Moorish arches, a legacy of British architects influenced by Islamic forms from India and the Middle East. These arches, with their pointed or horseshoe shapes, shade windows and create rhythm along a façade. In the same street, a Tudor-style gable may rise above a shopfront. This feature comes from English domestic architecture, marked by steeply pitched roofs and half-timbered frames. The British introduced it as part of their colonial civic buildings, mixing it with tropical adaptations such as wide verandas. Art Nouveau flourishes also appear, especially in decorative plasterwork and iron railings. These curving, plant-like designs reflect European tastes from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, brought to Malaya through trade links and the presence of European merchants and administrators. Colonial façades often frame these mixes, with symmetrical layouts, classical columns, and decorative cornices. In the background, high-rise towers of glass and steel now rise, representing the global architectural language of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. This variety tells a story without the need for a guidebook. A street might show how Chinese merchants settled near the river, how British colonial offices were built close to the administrative center, and how later commercial towers clustered along major roads. The differences in scale, proportion, and ornament give each building a distinct presence, yet together they form a visual record of the city's layered past. Uniform modern architecture can weaken this character. A row of identical glass towers or concrete blocks might be efficient to build and maintain, but it erases the signs of how a place developed. Without differences in style, it becomes harder to read the story of migration or trade in the built environment. Streets can feel interchangeable with those in any other modern city. While new buildings are necessary, if they all follow the same pattern, the sense of place becomes thinner. Part of the richness in older streets comes from materials and finishes that carry the mark of time and human touch. Weathered stone shows how many seasons have passed since it was cut and laid. The surface may hold small chips or moss in its joints, signs of long use rather than neglect. Hand-painted signs reveal the work of individual craftsmen, with slight variations in lettering or color that make them unique. In Kuala Lumpur's older districts, some signs still bear fading gold paint on black backgrounds, advertising trades that no longer exist. Carved woodwork is another marker of local skill and tradition. In shophouses, wooden screens and door panels often carry motifs from Chinese symbolism or Malay patterns, each cut by hand. These carvings soften the boundary between public and private space, allowing air to move while maintaining privacy. Textured plaster, whether in simple rough cast or elaborate molding, catches light in a way that flat concrete cannot. In some colonial facades, plaster was tinted to resemble stone, giving the appearance of imported materials without the cost of shipping them. These materials also respond to the environment in ways that modern synthetic cladding often does not. Timber shutters can be opened or closed to control air and light. Clay tiles keep interiors cooler under strong sun. Thick masonry walls slow heat gain during the day and release it at night. When you see these features still in use, you are seeing solutions developed over decades to suit local climate and available resources. In many cases, the mix of styles in a single street is the result of buildings being replaced one at a time rather than through wholesale redevelopment. A fire, a change in ownership, or a new commercial need might lead to one plot being rebuilt in the current style of that moment, while its neighbors remain as they were. Over years, this creates a sequence of facades that acts like a timeline. Walking down such a street is like turning the pages of a book, each building a chapter with its own setting and influences. Kuala Lumpur's city center still offers these sequences in places like Petaling Street and Jalan Tun Hs Lee. Here, a narrow two-story shophouse with a clay-tiled roof may stand next to a 1920s Art Deco building with bold geometric lines. A few doors down, a mid-century concrete structure might show early experiments with sun-shading fins. Above all this, the glass curtain wall of a recent office tower rises, reflecting the mix below in its surface. The result is not tidy in the sense of matching forms, but it is rich in information about the city's development. Reading this mix requires paying attention to details. The width of a shopfront might hint at land division rules from a century ago. The type of arch over a window could connect to a period of colonial rule or a wave of immigration. The texture of a wall might point to the tools and methods used at the time of construction. Even repairs can add to the story, as later materials fill gaps in older work. A cracked plaster wall patched with cement, for example, shows both the age of the building and the resourcefulness of its maintenance. When uniform architecture replaces this complexity, much of that information is lost. The line of the street may remain, but the visual record is wiped clean. A modern facade of glass panels reveals little about who built it, where they came from, or how the design was influenced by local conditions. While new buildings can have merit in other ways, their value as historical documents is limited unless they consciously incorporate and respect the language of the street they join. The mixed styles of a place like Kuala Lumpur are not simply decoration. They are physical evidence of movement, exchange, and adaptation over time. The combination of Chinese timber work, Moorish arches, Tudor roofs, Art Nouveau curves, and colonial symmetry alongside contemporary towers makes the city's streets a living archive. The materials and finishes, worn by weather and touch, add another layer to this record, speaking quietly of the people who shaped, used, and maintained them across generations. Old streets often engage all the senses at once. Underfoot, uneven cobblestones shift the rhythm of walking. Each step demands attention as your feet find their place on worn stone. The texture changes from smooth patches polished by decades of use to rough edges where repairs have been made. These surfaces record the movement of carts, animals, and people, carrying their history in every dip and rise. Air in such streets carries layers of scent. An open kitchen releases the smell of broth simmering with herbs, drifting into the lane. A few steps further, you might pass a bakery where the warmth of fresh bread pushes into the cool shade. In some cities, incense from a nearby shrine mingles with the sharper note of citrus from a fruit stall. These smells change through the day, shifting with meals, trade, and weather. They are not controlled by air conditioning or filtered vents. They move freely, marking the street as a shared space. Sound is just as present. In markets, voices overlap in different languages and accents, each shaped by the backgrounds of traders and customers. Metal shutters clatter open in the morning. Wooden carts roll over stone, their wheels squeaking in time with footsteps. In older quarters of port cities, you might hear the deep tone of a ship's horn in the distance, mixing with music from a cafe. Even quiet streets hold small sounds: a broom against pavement, a call to a neighbor across a balcony. Light in these streets is rarely even. Narrow lanes let sunlight in at sharp angles, creating strong contrasts between brightness and shadow. The irregular heights of buildings break light into shifting patches. A tall facade might block the morning sun entirely, leaving the space cool until midday. Turn a corner and the light opens, striking painted signs or polished brass door handles. This constant change makes the act of walking more engaging. You notice the temperature shift when you leave shadow for light, and you adjust your pace to the feel of the space. These experiences have been shown to affect how people remember a place. Research on sensory richness suggests that when more senses are engaged, memories form more strongly. A person is more likely to recall a street where they felt the uneven stones, heard the rise and fall of voices, and smelled specific foods. Emotional connection is strengthened when the environment offers variety and detail. A city with many such streets can anchor personal histories in shared public spaces, making them part of a collective memory. In old quarters, it is common for visitors to recall the feel of the place as much as its appearance. Someone might describe a street not by its name, but by the sound of a bell that rang from a tower, or by the smell of coffee they caught while turning into it. This is because the combination of sensory inputs creates a richer mental map. The brain links each sense to the same location, making the memory harder to fade. Modern streets built with uniform materials and layouts often lack this complexity. Surfaces are flat and consistent, designed for easy maintenance and predictable movement. Pavement might run unbroken from one end to the other, reducing the need to look down. Building heights align, and light is spread evenly through controlled spacing. Acoustic dampening in facades and traffic barriers removes many sounds, leaving only the low background hum of vehicles. Smells are contained inside sealed buildings, so the air changes little from one block to the next. These conditions create a calm, predictable environment, but they reduce the number of cues the senses receive. Without shifts in texture, light, sound, and smell, the street becomes less distinct in memory. One block can feel much like another, and a person may not recall where exactly they walked. While such spaces can be efficient and safe, they rarely leave a lasting impression beyond their overall scale or cleanliness. Imagine walking through a modern commercial district. The pavement is smooth concrete, the same light gray for hundreds of meters. Glass facades rise at the same height, reflecting the same sky. Doors are recessed behind uniform panels, and the air smells faintly of conditioned interiors, but little else. Voices are muted by double glazing. Even if you pass a cafe, its scent is trapped indoors. The lighting remains constant whether you are in front of an office block or a clothing store. After a while, you could close your eyes and not be able to tell one section from another. Now picture a walk through an older part of a city. Your shoes catch on a ridge of stone, and you slow to match the slope of the lane. A sudden pocket of sunlight falls across your path as a gap between buildings opens. You hear the slap of laundry on a washboard above you and the faint hiss of oil from a food stall ahead. The smell of grilled fish mixes with the sweetness of ripe mango at the corner. Even if you never visit again, these details fix themselves in your mind because they reach you through multiple senses. In many historic districts, this variety is not designed in the modern sense, but is the result of slow growth and adaptation. Streets curve where they once followed property lines or waterways, and these curves change the way sound and light travel. Open kitchens exist because the building form allows or demands them, and markets spill into the street because space is limited. Building materials weather at different rates, adding color and texture changes that alter the way light plays across them. Such sensory landscapes also influence how people use the street. A shaded section might attract people to stop and talk. The smell of bread might pull passersby toward a bakery, shaping foot traffic as much as signage does. Loud music from a shopfront can draw a crowd or mark the edge of a market area. These small, sensory-based decisions create a pattern of activity that repeats daily, forming part of the street's identity. When modern development replaces these conditions with controlled uniformity, much of this informal pattern disappears. Predictable lighting, sealed interiors, and regulated surfaces reduce the variety of cues that guide human behavior in public space. The street becomes a route to move through quickly rather than a place to linger and engage. Over time, this can weaken the connection between people and the physical environment, making the street more anonymous in both function and memory. The sensory richness of old streets shows why they remain memorable even when their buildings are worn or their surfaces uneven. Each change in sound, smell, texture, and light becomes part of the experience, offering layers of information that connect people to place. This engagement works quietly, not as a design spectacle, but as the sum of many small interactions between the built environment, the climate, and the life that moves through it. Older street systems often allow people to move in many different ways. In traditional grids and organic networks, you can take several routes to reach the same place. This spreads movement across many streets instead of forcing everyone into one main road. A grid offers a clear structure, with straight streets crossing at regular intervals. An organic network grows less predictably, shaped by land use, terrain, and history, but it still offers choice. Both can handle daily traffic well because they let people adjust their routes to avoid busy spots, closures, or delays. This permeability does more than manage traffic. It changes how people experience the city. When you can choose your route, you can take a quieter street to avoid noise or a busier one if you want to shop or meet people. In older districts, a person might start down a main street but then turn into a side lane to pick up food from a small vendor before heading home. The ability to do this without long detours depends on a connected street network. Navigation in old quarters is often supported by what urban designers call legibility. Streets form a hierarchy. Main streets are wide, lined with important buildings or markets, and connect to other main routes. Secondary streets are narrower, linking the main streets to smaller local lanes. Within this hierarchy, landmarks stand out and help people orient themselves. These could be towers, temples, fountains, or even distinctive shop fronts. In many historic towns, The local church spire, minaret, or clock tower is visible from several streets, guiding people without the need for signs. This kind of navigation is intuitive because the streets and landmarks tell you where you are. If you pass a certain market, you know you are near the river. If you see a particular roofline, you know which quarter you are entering. Even in dense networks, the combination of street width, building type, and visible landmarks creates a mental map that is easy to remember. Visitors in such places often find they can navigate after only a short time because the environment reinforces their memory with cues at every turn. Back lanes and side alleys play an important role in this system. In many older districts, these routes provide access for deliveries, waste removal, and other services without blocking the main street. They also offer spaces for small-scale activity. In some cities, micro-businesses operate from these alleys, a tailor working from a small room, a food stall serving regular customers, or a workshop repairing bicycles. Because these spaces are quieter and less formal than main streets, they allow for more personal interactions. Neighbors may stop to talk without the rush of main street traffic. Children can play with less risk from vehicles. In some cases, these back routes become destinations themselves. Food alleys in Southeast Asian cities are examples, where locals know the best places to eat are not on the main road, but tucked away. In Mediterranean towns, narrow lanes shaded by high walls offer cooler walking routes in summer. In each case, the network of small, permeable connections enriches the life of the street. Tokyo's backstreets show how this works in a modern context. Away from the major roads, Tokyo has a fine-grained network of narrow lanes and tiny intersections. These streets often carry very little car traffic, making them comfortable for walking and cycling. Small shops, cafes, and homes open directly onto the lane, creating a constant exchange between private and public space. The variety of routes lets people take the most direct path or choose a more scenic one. Because the scale is small, the city feels accessible even though it is large. These backstreets also support a local economy that might not survive on expensive main roads. In contrast, cul-de-sac suburbia limits choice. Streets often end in loops or dead ends, connected only by a few main roads. This design can reduce through traffic in residential areas, but it also forces all movement onto the same busy routes. Walking or cycling becomes less practical because even short trips may require long detours to reach a connecting street. Landmarks are fewer and often less distinctive, making navigation harder for those unfamiliar with the area. For local businesses, the lack of passing foot traffic reduces opportunities. Social contact between neighbors can also be lower if the only shared spaces are private yards or occasional parks rather than the public edges of a connected street. The difference between these two patterns shows how permeability shapes social life as much as movement. In a connected network like Tokyo's, people can meet by chance on their way to different places. A person heading to a bakery might pass a neighbor returning from the station, and a conversation begins. In a cul-de-sac layout, movement is more predictable and isolated, with fewer opportunities for unplanned encounters. The hierarchy in older street systems also helps with managing scale. In a well-connected district, a busy main street can handle commerce and transport without overwhelming the quieter lanes nearby. Secondary streets act as a transition, offering a balance between activity and calm. In this way, the network supports both public life and private living within a short distance. Permeability also allows cities to adapt. When a street is blocked for repairs or an event, traffic can spread through alternative routes without major disruption. Markets can shift into side streets during festivals, and people can still move through the area. In rigid, low-connectivity systems, a single blockage can cause long delays because there is no other way through. Old street systems that mix grids and organic patterns can be especially effective. The grid offers predictability, making it easy to plan movement and find addresses. The organic pattern adds variety and surprise, offering shortcuts and hidden routes that regular users come to know well. This combination can be seen in cities where an older core has expanded with planned extensions, yet the two patterns work together to maintain high connectivity. The success of such networks depends on their scale. Streets must be close enough together for people to walk between them easily. In many historic districts, intersections occur every 50 to 100 meters, giving constant options for turning and exploring. This scale makes even dense urban areas feel manageable, and it encourages walking over short vehicle trips. Back lanes and alleys also give space for uses that would not fit on main streets. In some places, they house small bars, art studios, or community gardens. In others, they provide seating areas where residents can gather. Because these spaces are less visible to outsiders, they often hold local culture in a concentrated form. This privacy can be valuable, allowing traditions and social ties to persist away from the pressures of more commercial streets. In older districts around the world, permeability and connectivity are not accidental. They come from centuries of adaptation where streets were added, widened, or linked in response to changing needs. The result is a network that is both practical and human in scale, supporting movement, social life, and economic activity all at once. When compared to more closed patterns, the benefits for both daily use and long-term resilience are clear. In areas with small blocks and many corners, people cross paths more often. Each corner is a decision point where walkers and cyclists can change direction and meet others coming from different routes. Shops and cafes placed on these corners increase the chance of interaction because they slow movement. Someone stopping for a coffee might greet a passerby, or a shopkeeper might chat with customers at the doorway. These small, repeated moments add up to a strong sense of community, even among people who do not know each other by name. Public plazas work in a similar way, but on a larger scale. They create open spaces where movement from several streets meets. People may come for a market, a performance, or simply to sit and watch. Because plazas are open to all, they mix different groups and activities. In older cities, they are often surrounded by shops, public buildings, and housing, so they remain active throughout the day. A person might pass through a plaza in the morning on the way to work, return at midday for lunch, and cross it again in the evening when meeting friends. Mixed-use zoning strengthens this constant activity. When homes, shops, offices, and public services share the same area, the street stays busy beyond the traditional workday. Residents keep the area active in the early morning and late evening. Workers add movement during the day. Visitors come at different times for shopping, dining, or entertainment. The mix of uses prevents long periods when the street feels empty. In older districts, this pattern often developed naturally as buildings changed function over time, with a shop on the ground floor, offices above, and apartments on the top levels. Copenhagen's pedestrian district shows how deliberate planning can achieve similar results. In the 1960s, the city converted a central street, Streget, into a car-free zone. At first, there was doubt about whether people would use it in a city known for cold winters. Over time, the area expanded to include several connected streets and squares. The removal of cars allowed cafes to place tables outside, shop fronts to open more directly onto the street, and pedestrians to move without traffic barriers. The space became a destination not just for shopping, but for spending time. The economic results were clear. Shops in the pedestrian district saw increased sales because more people passed by and felt comfortable stopping. The social results were just as important. People lingered, met friends by chance, and felt safe letting children play. The district supported street performers, markets, and seasonal events that would have been difficult with vehicle traffic. The constant movement of people created a visible sense of life, drawing more visitors and reinforcing the cycle. In places with high social density, casual encounters happen without formal arrangement. Two people might meet in a plaza and decide to have lunch together. A musician playing on the street might attract a small crowd, sparking conversations among strangers. These encounters depend on public spaces being both accessible and appealing at all hours. Lighting, seating, and a variety of uses all help maintain this flow. Modern single-use districts often lack these conditions. An office park filled with tall buildings may be busy from 9 to 5, but after workers leave, it can become empty and silent. The same happens in shopping districts that close in the evening, or in residential suburbs with no shops or public spaces. Without a mix of functions, there are few reasons for people to be in the area outside its main use period. The absence of activity can make the space feel unsafe or neglected, even if it is well maintained. The difference between a mixed-use street and a single-use district is clear in how they sound and look at different times. On a mixed street, you might hear delivery trucks in the morning, market chatter at midday, and music from a bar at night. Lights in shop windows mix with the warm glow from apartment interiors above. In a single-use office area, the sound of traffic fades to almost nothing in the evening, and the buildings become dark except for a few security lights. Small blocks help maintain variety in these mixed-use settings. Because plots are smaller, more owners and tenants share the street. This increases diversity in what is offered. Different kinds of shops, food stalls, or services appear side by side. It also makes change easier. If one shop closes, another can take its place without affecting a large stretch of street. In contrast, a single large building in a modern district might house only one or two businesses. If they leave, the whole block can feel empty. Corner shops in particular play an outsized role. They face two streets, doubling the number of passersby and increasing visibility. Their location makes them natural meeting points. A corner cafe can catch people walking along either street and pull them into the same space. In residential areas, a corner grocery or bakery often becomes part of daily routines, creating repeated contact between neighbors. Public plazas support this network by acting as anchors. In many European cities, you can see how plazas connect to each other through short streets, forming a chain of public rooms. This arrangement allows for continuous social life. If one plaza is quiet, another a short walk away might be lively. The variety encourages movement, exploration, and repeated visits. Copenhagen's experience also shows that when streets are redesigned for people rather than cars, social density can grow even in places without historic urban form. The key is to create spaces that invite lingering, allow diverse uses, and connect well to surrounding areas. In the pedestrian district, the design encourages walking through, stopping, and returning later. Each visit can lead to a new encounter or experience, keeping the place in people's daily patterns. Modern single-use districts can struggle to replicate this. Even if they include open spaces, those spaces may not be connected to active edges. A plaza surrounded by blank walls or closed offices in the evening offers little reason to stay. Without constant movement and variation, public areas lose their role as meeting grounds. Activity clusters only during peak use, leaving long stretches of emptiness. In older mixed-use settings, the street itself is the connector. People pass each other on foot or bicycle, exchange greetings, and notice changes: a new sign, a different menu, a seasonal decoration. These small observations feed into a sense of belonging. You know the rhythm of the place, and you notice when it changes. This awareness grows from daily exposure, which is possible only when the street is active across the day. The lesson from places like Copenhagen is that social density depends on more than population numbers. It comes from the physical arrangement of streets and buildings, the presence of mixed uses, and the design of spaces that draw people out of their private interiors. Small blocks, corner shops, and public plazas give people reasons to be in the same space at the same time and to return again and again. Over time, these repeated encounters weave a network of relationships that makes the street more than just a route from one place to another. In the 20th century, many cities redesigned themselves to move cars quickly. Planning shifted from creating places for people to creating systems for fast traffic. Streets were widened, intersections were simplified for vehicle flow, and new road networks cut through existing neighborhoods. The goal was speed and efficiency for drivers, often at the expense of the quality of the street as a shared space. As cars became the main mode of transport, space once used for walking, gathering, and small businesses was reallocated. Wider lanes replaced narrow streets. Front setbacks pushed buildings away from the sidewalk to allow for parking and turning movements. Large surface parking lots appeared in place of homes, gardens, or shops. This spread buildings apart, making walking less practical and reducing the variety of activities visible from the street. These changes altered how streets felt. In older layouts, buildings stood close to the edge of the street, with windows and doors opening directly to it. This arrangement created a constant exchange between public and private life. In the car-focused model, open parking lots and wide roadways created empty gaps between people and buildings. The street became a space to pass through, not to spend time in. Safety was also affected. When streets were designed for higher speeds, the difference between the pace of cars, bicycles, and pedestrians grew larger. A person walking moves at about 5 kilometers per hour, a cyclist at 15 to 25, and a car at 50 or more. The greater the speed difference, the more dangerous interactions become. In a collision, the chance of serious injury or death rises sharply with vehicle speed. Wide lanes encourage faster driving, while long crossing distances increase the time pedestrians spend exposed to traffic. Cyclists are caught between these worlds. In many car-oriented streets, they are given narrow lanes beside fast-moving vehicles or are left to share the same space with cars without protection. This discourages cycling, especially for children or less confident riders. Pedestrians, too, must navigate a landscape where their needs are secondary. Crossings may be far apart, requiring long detours. Signals often prioritize vehicle flow, giving people on foot less time to cross. High-volume arterial roads have a particular effect on social connections. These wide, fast roads often act as barriers between neighborhoods. Even when a crosswalk exists, the noise, speed, and volume of traffic can make crossing feel unpleasant or unsafe. Over time, people on opposite sides of an arterial may interact less, as casual visits and short walks are replaced by planned trips in cars. The result is a form of social fragmentation. In older, more connected street networks, people could move between areas easily, maintaining ties across a wider range. With large roads acting as dividers, movement becomes more restricted, and daily life narrows to the immediate side of the barrier. This can weaken local networks of friends, family, and commerce. Examples of this change can be seen in many North American cities, where mid-century freeway construction cut through established districts. Streets that once carried slow, mixed traffic were replaced by multi-lane roads with few crossings. In some cases, entire blocks of housing and small shops were removed to make room for interchanges and ramps. The physical gap was matched by a social one, as the places that had connected people were lost. Even smaller-scale arterial widening can have this effect. A two-lane road lined with houses and corner shops may support walking and informal conversation. If it is widened to 4 lanes with a median, the distance across doubles, speeds increase, and the sidewalk becomes noisier. Shops lose foot traffic, and the sense of a shared street declines. People are less likely to linger outside or allow children to play near the road. The emphasis on vehicle flow also affects how new developments are planned. Large commercial centers are often set back behind parking lots, with entrances oriented toward cars rather than sidewalks. Residential areas may be connected to main roads only through a few large intersections, forcing all movement into these points. This reduces the number of routes available and makes the street network less resilient. In some cases, the car-centric shift was seen as progress, offering convenience and freedom of movement. It allowed people to live farther from where they worked and to reach new areas quickly. But the trade-offs were significant. The scale and design of streets changed the nature of public life, reducing casual contact and narrowing the range of safe, accessible activities. The safety issues remain a major concern. A street designed for fast vehicle movement is less forgiving of mistakes. Drivers have less time to react, and pedestrians or cyclists are more exposed to harm. Even when laws and enforcement aim to protect vulnerable users, the design itself encourages behavior that increases risk. Narrower lanes, shorter crossings, and more visible pedestrian activity can slow traffic and improve safety, but these are often absent in car-oriented streets. Noise is another factor that shapes how people use space. High-speed roads produce constant background noise from engines, tires, and airflow. This can make street-level conversation difficult and discourage outdoor activity near the road. In contrast, slower streets allow for more human-scale sound, voices, footsteps, music, that supports a sense of community. The allocation of space is also telling. In many car-oriented streets, the majority of the width is given to vehicle lanes, with narrow sidewalks pushed to the edge. Street trees, seating, and other pedestrian amenities are limited or removed to make room for turning lanes or parking. The result is a public realm that signals priority for cars over all other uses. Over time, this design approach can reshape habits and expectations. People may come to see driving as the only practical option, even for short trips. Walking or cycling feels inconvenient or unsafe, reinforcing the cycle of car dependency. Once this pattern is established, it can be difficult to reverse without significant investment in alternative infrastructure. The car-centric shift also affects property values and land use. Properties near busy roads may lose residential appeal due to noise and safety concerns. Commercial uses that rely on drive-by visibility and parking may replace local shops that once served pedestrians. This changes the mix of services available and can reduce the diversity of activities in an area. The focus on movement over place created a lasting imprint on urban form. In many cities, it produced environments where the street is no longer the heart of community life, but a corridor for vehicles. While it solved certain transportation problems, it introduced others that continue to shape how people live, move, and connect. The physical and social divisions created by this model remain visible in the layout, activity, and atmosphere of many streets today. When a place is planned down to the smallest detail, it can lose the unpredictability that makes streets lively. Some new urbanist developments try to recreate the charm of older districts by using traditional street patterns, human-scale buildings, and public spaces. They often succeed in appearance but fall short in atmosphere. Every shopfront is approved, every sign follows a style guide, and every activity is in its designated zone. This careful control can keep the streets clean and orderly, but it can also strip away the chance encounters and improvised uses that give older streets their energy. In master-planned areas, uses are often fixed in advance. A cafe is placed here, a market hall there, housing in its own block, offices in another. The plan may provide all the right elements on paper, but because each space is assigned from the start, there is little room for change. If a shop closes, a replacement must fit the same permitted use and style. Public spaces may be open in theory, but are managed with rules that limit what can happen. No unlicensed vending, no spontaneous performances, no gatherings without permission. Older streets rarely developed this way. They grew from daily life, adapting to needs as they arose. A quiet corner might host a street vendor in the morning, a repair stall in the afternoon, and a game of cards in the evening. A wall could serve as a backrest for a seated group or as a display for goods. The rules, if they existed, were often flexible or loosely enforced, allowing a mix of formal and informal activity to share the same space. This controlled chaos is part of what makes old streets vibrant. Vendors set up where the foot traffic is, not where a plan said they should be. Improvised seating, plastic stools, crates, or low walls, lets people stop where they want, not just at official benches. Signs compete for attention in different shapes and colors, creating a visual texture that reflects the personalities of their owners. The result is a street that changes from week to week, even day to day, keeping it alive in people's minds. Singapore's heritage districts show how preservation can lean toward perfection. Streets like those in Chinatown or Kampong Glam have been carefully restored, with strict rules on facades, paint colors, and signage. The result is beautiful and easy to navigate, with no risk of decay or disorder. But the experience can feel curated, as if walking through a museum exhibit. Shop uses are often aimed at visitors rather than the local community. Sidewalks are clear of informal traders, and public spaces are kept free of clutter. This control makes the streets safe and attractive, but it also removes much of the unplanned activity that keeps a place surprising. Kuala Lumpur's older districts offer a different picture. In areas like Petaling Street or Jalan Alor, the streets are layered with activity that was never drawn on a plan. Food stalls extend into the roadway in the evening. Chairs and tables spill across uneven pavements. Shop signs overlap, some hand-painted, others neon, each competing with the next. Vendors shift their locations based on weather, events, or the police schedule. The mix of smells, sounds, and colors changes along the block. Some might call it messy, but that mess is also a record of the street's use by the people who live and work there. In KL, you might see a tailor's machine set up outside a shop in the morning, replaced by a satay grill in the evening. A narrow alley might be a quiet shortcut during the day, but turn into a row of pop-up food stalls at night. The changes are not coordinated by a central authority. They happen because the street allows it. This adaptability means that space is used more fully, and the street offers a reason to return often, since it will never look quite the same twice. Perfect planning can unintentionally limit this kind of life. When every element is fixed, the street becomes predictable. Visitors may come once to admire it, but find little reason to return unless a scheduled event is happening. Locals may pass through without stopping, knowing that the offerings rarely change. Even the quality of the materials can reinforce the distance. High-spec finishes and uniform lighting can make it feel like the space is meant to be looked at rather than used freely. The contrast is not about cleanliness or maintenance alone. A well-kept old street can still be full of informal uses if its rules and design leave room for them. The difference lies in whether the street is treated as a living space or a finished product. In a living space, wear and repair are part of the texture. A wall might be patched with mismatched bricks, a canopy replaced with whatever fabric was at hand. These small variations show the presence of human decisions and resourcefulness. In master-planned environments, change often requires approval and funding, which slows the response to new needs. If a sudden increase in pedestrian traffic calls for more seating, it might take months before anything is added. In an older, loosely regulated street, someone might place stools or crates within hours. The result may not match the design standards, but it works in the moment. The visual order of a perfectly planned street can also affect how people behave. In a space where every detail is deliberate, people may feel hesitant to do anything that was not clearly intended. Sitting on a step, leaning against a wall, or stopping to play music might feel out of place. In a more chaotic environment, these actions blend into the background, adding to the street's life rather than disrupting it. Singapore's approach shows the benefits and limits of control. The heritage districts are stable, safe, and visually consistent. They attract tourism and preserve valuable architecture. But compared to KL's older streets, they offer fewer surprises and less of the direct, unstructured interaction between people and place. KL's organic messiness can be harder to manage, but it produces a street life that is constantly renewing itself through the small choices of its users. The difference between these two models raises a question about how much control is desirable. Too little can lead to neglect and decay, making a place uncomfortable or unsafe. Too much can smooth away the very elements that make it worth visiting. The middle ground is where planning leaves space for improvisation, where formal design sets a framework but does not fill every gap. In this space, street vendors, pop-up activities, and personal touches can flourish without overwhelming the public realm. Vibrant old streets are not just a product of age, they are a product of freedom within limits. Their energy comes from many hands shaping them over time, without waiting for permission or a master plan. In trying to recreate this energy, new developments often miss the role of this unplanned layer. Without it, even the most beautiful streets can feel static, while the messy, adaptive ones keep drawing people back. The proportions of a street shape how people feel when they use it. A human-scale street often has a height-to-width ratio between 1:1 and 1:3. This means that the height of the buildings is roughly equal to the width of the street, or up to 3 times smaller. Within this range, the space feels enclosed enough to be comfortable, but open enough for light and air. You can see details on the upper floors without straining, and the buildings feel like part of the same shared environment. When buildings rise much higher without widening the street, the proportions change. If the height is far greater than the width, the street can start to feel like a canyon. Light is reduced, shadows lengthen, and the sky becomes a narrow strip. While this scale can be dramatic, it can also be overwhelming, making people feel small and disconnected from the surroundings. Mid-rise buildings, usually between 4 and 8 stories, often strike a balance. They are tall enough to provide density and varied uses, but low enough to keep street activity grounded. You can still see the detail of balconies, windows, and shop signs from the pavement. Businesses on the ground floor remain connected to passers-by, and residents above can still notice what is happening on the street. The relationship between inside and outside stays active. High-rise buildings change this relationship. When most of a building's floors are far above street level, the connection between occupants and the street weakens. People on the upper floors may not hear street sounds, see daily changes, or feel part of the street's life. At ground level, tall towers often need wide entrances, large lobbies, and setbacks that push active uses away from the pedestrian space. This can create long stretches with little visual or physical engagement for someone walking by. Towering glass walls can intensify the feeling of detachment. Glass can be transparent, but on a large scale, it often reflects rather than reveals, especially in strong light. Instead of showing activity inside, it becomes a mirror of the sky or surrounding buildings. This removes cues that make streets feel inhabited. Without visible human activity or detail, the facade becomes a backdrop rather than part of the shared public space. The smooth, uniform surface also gives few points of reference for judging scale, which can make the street feel impersonal. By contrast, facades with smaller openings, varied materials, and visible features like balconies or awnings give a street texture and human reference points. Even a taller building can feel less alienating if it has detail and activity at the ground level and breaks its surface into smaller elements. The important factor is not just height, but how height is handled in proportion to street width and the scale of human movement. Barcelona's Eixample offers a clear example of harmonious scale that works with modern needs. Designed in the 19th century by Ildefons Cerdà, the district uses a regular grid of octagonal blocks. The streets are wide enough for light and air, but the buildings are generally 6 to 8 stories, keeping a strong sense of enclosure. The height-to-width ratio stays within the comfortable human scale range. The chamfered corners open up intersections, improving visibility and creating small public spaces at each corner. In the Eixample, the ground floors are active, with shops, cafes, and services facing directly onto the street. Upper floors are residential, and many have balconies with plants or laundry, adding signs of life. The consistent mid-rise height keeps the skyline level, which strengthens the sense of the street as a unified space rather than a series of disconnected buildings. This scale also works for utility. The streets carry cars, bicycles, and pedestrians, and the blocks are large enough to house dense populations while keeping walking distances reasonable. Services and public transport fit into the grid without overpowering the human experience of the street. Even with modern traffic, the proportions keep the focus on the shared public realm. When proportions move too far from human scale, other measures are often needed to make streets comfortable. Wide roads lined with very tall buildings may require extra planting, awnings, or public art to soften the space. But these are additions to compensate for proportions that are not naturally comfortable. In streets like those of the Eixample, the form itself creates comfort without extra devices. The psychological effect of scale is subtle but important. On a human-scale street, you can gauge distances, recognize people at a glance, and read the expressions of someone across the way. You feel part of the space rather than a small figure in an oversized setting. When scale shifts toward the monumental, people may pass through quickly, using the street as a route rather than a place to stay. The sense of shared territory weakens. In areas dominated by high rises, street life often concentrates in pockets where proportions are smaller, side streets, plazas, or low-rise clusters. This shows how people naturally seek spaces where they can see and be seen, hear and be heard, without the barrier of scale. The most successful tall building districts are those that combine tower blocks with strong active bases and mid-rise surroundings to keep the pedestrian environment inviting. The link between proportion and comfort also connects to light. A street with a height-to-width ratio in the human range gets sunlight for more of the day, especially in winter when the sun is low. This affects not only warmth, but mood and activity. People are more likely to linger in well-lit spaces, and businesses benefit from the visibility. In overly tall, narrow streets, long shadows can make even warm climates feel cool and uninviting at ground level. Designing streets with human-scale proportions does not mean limiting density or avoiding modern building types. It means arranging height and width so that the space between buildings supports social and sensory engagement. Mid-rise development, active ground floors, and a consistent relationship between building height and street width all help achieve this balance. Examples like Barcelona's Eixample show that it is possible to combine utility, density, and comfort when proportions are respected. Even as cities grow taller, the principles of human-scale design remain relevant. The street is the level at which most people experience the city, and its proportions shape that experience more than almost any other factor. A balanced height-to-width ratio, visible signs of life, and active edges can keep streets welcoming, even in the densest urban environments. Reviving the qualities of older streets in new developments begins with making movement easy and varied. Large superblocks limit choice and force long detours, discouraging walking and cycling. Breaking these blocks into smaller segments allows more routes and shorter distances between destinations. Even if the main street grid stays the same, adding mid-block crossings or narrow pedestrian paths can connect spaces that would otherwise be far apart. A simple passage linking two parallel streets can turn a 5-minute detour into a 30-second stroll, changing how people use the area. Permeability works best when it is fine-grained. Small connections at frequent intervals allow people to choose routes based on preference rather than necessity. Someone might take a shaded lane on a hot day or pass through a small plaza to meet a friend. This variety encourages exploration and spreads activity across more streets, rather than concentrating it in a single corridor. It also makes places feel safer, since more eyes and feet are present in more locations. Once people can move freely, the next step is to give priority to walking and cycling. Streets designed only for fast vehicle flow create barriers instead of connections. Traffic calming measures, narrower lanes, raised crossings, and tight corner radii reduce speeds and make drivers more aware of other users. Shared surfaces, where cars move slowly among pedestrians and cyclists, can work in local streets with low traffic volumes. In busier areas, dedicated cycle lanes and wide pavements make non-motorized travel more comfortable. These changes also improve how the street feels. Slower traffic reduces noise, making conversation easier and allowing other sounds, voices, music, the clink of dishes from a cafe to become part of the street's character. When people feel safe on foot or by bike, they are more likely to linger, increasing the chances for casual encounters and small-scale commerce. Sensory richness is essential to making a street memorable. Active facades, where the building front is open to the street through windows, doors, and displays, draw attention and invite interaction. A row of closed shutters gives nothing to the senses, but a shop with goods spilling onto the pavement, or a restaurant with tables under an awning, creates movement and interest. Open kitchens add smells to the mix, grilled food, baking bread, or fresh herbs carried into the air. Varied textures keep the eye engaged. Brick, stone, wood, and plaster each weather differently, creating depth and warmth. Even modern materials can be used in ways that add texture, perforated metal panels casting shadows, or patterned concrete with a tactile surface. Small details like hand-painted signs or decorative tile add a personal touch that large, uniform panels cannot match. The aim is not to imitate old streets exactly, but to provide the same variety that gives them life. Microclusters of mixed uses within short walking distances strengthen this effect. Instead of separating housing, shops, and offices into different zones, small groups of each can be placed close together. A block might have apartments above, a grocery and a cafe at street level, and a co-working space or clinic nearby. This arrangement ensures that the street stays active through the day and into the evening. When uses are mixed in small clusters, routines overlap. A resident buying bread in the morning might cross paths with an office worker grabbing a coffee. A parent picking up a child from school might stop at the same shop as someone on their way home from work. These small encounters happen because people are drawn to the same spaces for different reasons. The closer these functions are to each other, the more they reinforce each other's activity. Examples from cities that have revitalized their streets show how these elements work together. In some parts of Seoul, narrow alleys between larger streets have been opened or improved to create new walking routes. This has allowed small businesses to thrive in spaces that once served only as service access. In Vancouver, new developments often include pedestrian mews, short, narrow lanes lined with shops and homes that cut through larger blocks. These spaces are scaled for walking with varied frontages and places to sit. Traffic calming has been used in many European cities to reclaim space for people. In Amsterdam, streets with mixed traffic often use brick paving instead of asphalt, signaling to drivers that they are in a shared space. The reduced speeds make it possible for children to play near the street and for cafes to place tables outside without a barrier. This change is not only about safety, but also about creating the conditions for richer street life. Designing for sensory richness means thinking beyond what a street looks like in a drawing. It requires imagining what someone will hear, smell, and feel as they walk. A narrow lane lined with food stalls offers constant variation, steam rising from pots, vendors calling out orders, the sound of chopping or sizzling, the warmth of a grill against the evening air. These sensations work together to form a strong memory of the place. Incorporating microclusters into new areas can be challenging when regulations or market pressures favor large, single-use developments. One way to address this is to design buildings with flexible ground floors that can be divided into smaller units over time. A single large space might open as one business, but later be split into several smaller ones, increasing variety and resilience. Another is to set aside small plots for independent operators rather than leasing all space to large chains. When these strategies come together, they can turn new streets into places that feel as layered and engaging as older ones. A pedestrian can move along a network of short connected streets, crossing paths with others in small plazas or lanes. Traffic moves slowly enough to share the space safely. Along the way, shop fronts change every few meters, each offering a different sound, smell, or sight. Within a few minutes' walk, there are places to live, work, shop, and meet. The key is to design for use, not just for appearance. Streets that look appealing but lack permeability, safety, sensory variety, or nearby mixed uses will not sustain activity over time. Streets that combine these elements will not only draw people in but keep them coming back, creating the same kind of daily engagement that has kept older streets alive for centuries. Old streets work because several elements line up. They connect well at many points, so people have route choice. They hold a human scale where building height and street width feel balanced. They layer the senses through texture, sound, light, and smell. They pack in social life with many doors, small plots, and short blocks. They stay flexible, so users can shift through the day and across seasons. When these parts come together, the street supports daily life with little effort. You do not need a festival to make it lively. The form does the work. Age helps only because time allowed trial and error. What matters most are the design rules baked into the place. A new street can have the same magic if it follows those rules. Give it many crossings and narrow blocks. Line its edges with doors and windows that face the sidewalk. Keep building heights in the 1.1 to 1.3 range with the street width. Mix uses within a short walk. Allow room for informal activity at the edge. A bench, a crate, a stall. Let light, shade, and sound vary along the way. These choices make memory, comfort, and chance meetings. They do not require centuries. Picture a new district on a former rail yard. The plan breaks the land into blocks 80 to 120 meters long. Mid-block passages connect courtyards and lanes. Ground floors have high ceilings and frequent doors. Shops, clinics, and small offices fill the base. Homes sit above. Corners hold cafes, daycare, and a corner grocery. There are trees, awnings, and seats. Cars can enter, but at low speed and with few advantages. Most deliveries happen from alleys or at set hours. The result is busy from early morning to late evening. None of this depends on age. It depends on choices that put people first. City policy can make these choices the norm. Zoning reform is the place to start. Allow mixed uses on most streets. Permit small shops, studios, and corner stores in housing areas. Remove parking minimums and set parking maximums near good transit. Cap block length and require mid-block crossings in large sites. Limit front setbacks so doors meet the sidewalk. Set a maximum distance between entrances to prevent blank walls. Allow more homes in small buildings, the missing middle, on side streets near main streets. Reward active ground floors with extra buildable area above. The public realm needs steady investment. Widen sidewalks where people walk most. Add curb extensions to shorten crossings. Use raised tables at key intersections. Protect bike lanes with curbs, not paint. Plant street trees for shade and comfort. Provide simple seating at regular intervals. Keep lights warm and at pedestrian height. Design crosswalks for the slowest user. Maintain surfaces so they drain, grip, and stay even. Give vendors access to power and water where they set up. These moves help daily life more than one-off showpieces. Street network design sets the base. Aim for high intersection density so routes are short. Break up superblocks with new links. Use tight corner radii to slow turns. Filter through traffic on local streets while keeping them permeable for walking and cycling. Add service alleys for loading and trash so main fronts stay clear. Keep building height in proportion to the street and give taller buildings active bases. Where towers rise, set podiums at mid-rise scale with frequent doors and real uses, not empty lobbies. Flexibility keeps streets alive over time. Make ground floors easy to subdivide or combine. Write simple permits for pop-ups, carts, and markets with clear hours and safety rules. Support temporary uses in vacant lots so gaps do not deaden a block. Offer small grants for signs, canopies, and shopfront repairs. Allow outdoor seating with simple, fair rules. Permit festivals that close streets for short periods and test new layouts. Build in places to sit, lean, and perch. People will show you what the street wants to be. Freight and access matter. Create micro-delivery hubs at the edge of busy centers. Use cargo bikes and hand carts for last-mile trips. Set delivery windows on narrow streets so people and goods do not compete at peak times. Give clear loading zones that do not cut the sidewalk. These steps reduce conflict and keep the street safe. Equity needs a seat at the table from day one. Pair upgrades with anti-displacement measures. Support community land trusts and nonprofit housing on or near key streets. Link growth to affordable shop space for local owners. Offer right-to-return policies after public works. Keep permit costs low for small vendors. Make every design choice meet universal access, with tactile guides, ramps, clear signs, and places to rest. A people-first street must include all people. Management is as important as design. Create local stewardship with merchants, residents, and the city. Keep cleaning, repair, and tree care regular and boring. Use quick feedback loops. If a crossing feels unsafe, test a curb extension with cones next week, not next year. If a stall line blocks a door, paint a simple queue zone. Small fixes, done often, build trust and keep the street tuned. Culturally, people-first streets pay off for decades. Children gain in independence when they can walk or cycle safely. Teens meet friends without a car. Older adults stay active and connected. Local shops thrive on regular foot traffic rather than rare car trips. Street rituals form, morning coffee at the same window, a weekly market, music on a Friday night. These patterns weave shared memory. They teach strangers how to share space. They lower social distance across age, income, and culture. They make civics visible because you meet your neighbors face to face. Health improves in quiet ways. Short walks replace short drives. Trees and slower traffic cut noise and heat. Social ties buffer stress. Small businesses pass skills across generations. Crafts, food, and language fill the public ear. Visitors come, but the place does not turn into a stage set because locals still use it every day. That is the long game, a street that holds work, rest, trade, and play in balance. The design does not chase novelty. It sets a clear frame and lets life vary within it. Cities that adopt these principles can build new streets with old strengths. The path is not heroic, it is patient and specific. Fix the block size. Shorten the crossing. Plant the tree. Open the kitchen to the street. Put a bench where people pause. Let a vendor try a corner. Keep rules clear and light. Measure what people do, then adjust. Over years, the street will teach you what it needs.